Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. The voice of Asheville heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com. For more on Walter's music, Davine Dial in Asheville, thank you for managing WPVM-FM. And Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos. If you would like to reach me, Navé at jamesnavé.com, Navé spelled N-A-V-E. And I would like to remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, connect with a very active community of writers, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go to start that connection. We do a free Saturday and a free Thursday gathering on Zoom, and you can find out more about that. We are there for only an hour, and yet it's a very lively hour with a bunch of really great writers. So you're welcome to join that if you're so moved to do so. So today I have a collaborator. Her name is Kelly Pasholk, and Kelly is the book designer and the project manager for this delightful book that just came out by Paul O'Connor titled Taos Portraits II. And it includes 60 images, black and white photographs of artists who have gathered in Taos and who work in Taos. And it also has 60 written stories about these artists. And Kelly is the book designer. She's been working with Paul O'Connor and Lynn Robinson for the last 2 years on this project. So I've invited Kelly to come on and talk about book design, art, creativity, whatever we please. So Kelly, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thanks, Navé. I'm happy to be here.
And so let's begin by having you give us an overview of the things that bring you the most joy creatively. What really stirs you up creatively when you're doing your work?
Well, I specialize in book design now, which wasn't always the case. I've had a background in printing and corporate advertising, and I moved to Taos and was doing actually horsefly. I just stepped in, and that was my monthly gig. Really good introduction to Taos. And Bill Whaley, who was the publisher of Horsefly, which was a monthly publication that came out and talked about politics and art in Taos. He had black and white portraits of Agnes Martin, Dennis Hopper, Saki Caravas, and Tolly Richards on his wall. And my office was on the other side of a glass wall. So I'm looking at these beautiful black and white portraits while I'm working at Horsefly. And I've always loved black and white photography. I've done a lot of photography myself, and I love books. So years later, after Bill sold Horsefly, and Paul comes to Bill about doing this book, and Bill's like, of course we have to get Kelly. And that was my first book design 12 years ago. And so it's kind of come full circle. But meantime, it began my specialty in book design, because then people like Lenny Foster and Bill Whaley and Cindy Brown, a lot of local artists started coming to me to do books. And then before I even started designing books, I've been a bookaholic. I have such a stack of books that they don't all fit on my shelf. And I'm one of those book geeks that actually reads the copyright page.
So when you started 12 years ago to learn book design, you said you were in the corporate world. You'd already had a long career doing work and you were engaged in professionally. Book design is a complicated proposition. You just don't throw a few pages down and say, here you go. How did you learn how to do it, and what skills did you transfer from what you already knew into this book design learning that you participated in?
Well, part of my education was actually in printing. So I learned about how pages go on the press. I had ink under my fingernails for like 2 years while I was doing that program. And also because I spend a lot of time with books. And I hate it when you open up a book and you have to bend the spine. like one of my advice, if you're ever going to self-publish and try to design it yourself, just give your inside margin a little more room than the outside margin. That's one key. But I think it's just because I thoroughly know printing. I mean, I couldn't go in and run a big Heidelberg anymore. But it just all kind of adds up. I'm very mathematical when it comes to my design. When I started in graphic arts, we were still on CompuGraphing, and you had to write code to get everything to line up. So you had to learn printer's math, which is picas and points, to get your line space, to get the font the right size, and to get it to lay on the page. You just had code in front of you, and then it would come out on a sheet after you put that code in. Whereas it's different now when you have a Macintosh and you can just pull text blocks and everything. So I still work very mathematically and precisely when I do book design, and it makes a difference when you're going through a book. Of course, there are some that you don't want that. But if you want something to easily read.
So there's printing, like the Hewlett-Packard printer connected to the laptop. You hit print and out it comes. I've printed the sheet, right? And then there's printing in the old-fashioned typeset way, which we probably don't do much anymore, where ink was slopped all over everywhere. I, years ago, was in the screen printing business. I screen printed T-shirts, 6-color T-shirts.
Oh,
So
great.
you had screens and you dragged the squeegee over. So it was a serious hand thing. This was pre T-shirt, mechanical T-shirt machines. We were doing it by hand and pressing to make sure the ink went through the screen and came out properly on the T-shirt. So that's one kind of printing. So for people who don't know printing, when you say you grew up with ink on your skin, in your veins, give us a sense of how that works from a more classic point of view. Nowadays, we can get something printed on Amazon, one off, and it comes the next day.
Right. So Amazon or most on-demand printers, I would say all on-demand printers, are printing electrostatic. So basically, they have big copy machines. It's toner. It might be a laser toner or inkjet. It depends on the company and how many prints they're doing. There is still offset printing where you have a press with ink and rollers and plates. And that's actually how we did Taos Portraits. And really fine art books of this caliber, that's the best way to go. It's still so rich. And I'm not saying you can't do a picture book through on-demand printing, but it's just not, I haven't found the quality to be quite as high as offset printing.
Can you break the offset printing down a little bit more? Why is it so much richer? The quality of the ink is better, the way it's laid on the paper, the choice of the paper. How does all that work?
Well, all of those things. You do have more choice of a paper. Usually in on-demand printing, you have a choice of maybe 50-pound white, 70-pound cream, or 50 or 70-pound white. You have maybe 3 choices. You can't say, oh, I want to use this certain brand, sterling paper. When I first got out of college, I worked at a small print shop, and we'd have books of samples of paper that we would print on. And that was just a small press. Even the offset printers today, they'll send you printing paper samples, sometimes in book form. Ink also gets pressed into the paper somewhat, whereas the electrostatic is kind of sitting on top of the paper, so it's not going to be archival. We don't know what it's going to be like because it hasn't been around that long, but you still can pick up a book that's, offset printing really got popular in the 50s. Before that, it was more engraving, letter set where they're using lead type and pressing it onto the paper, which is different than the offset that's just kind of an image squeezed against the paper.
So, from a skill point of view, when you are doing offset printing and you have the ink and the rollers and you have the paper, I would suspect there's an art in choosing the kind of ink to pair it with the different kinds of paper because some paper is more absorbent than others. and the ink might have to be switched around. I don't know if that's the case or not. Is that how that would work?
Most printers doing offset color now use 4-color, which is a combination of CMYK, which is cyan, sort of a blue, magenta, yellow, and black. And sometimes we add an extra color. So like when we did Taos Portraits, we added another color. There's all kinds of different ways to get the richness that you want. And a lot of times what you do is you talk to the printer, you find out what their capabilities are.
And you did all of this with Paul and Lynn Robinson, Paul O'Connor and Lynn Robinson, in collaboration with Taos Portraits. I would love for you to give us your take on the steps that you had to go through with Paul and Lynn to make this happen. Choosing the visuals, Paul chose the photographs, choosing the writers, pairing them up, finding the printer, printing it somewhere in the world, setting all that up, and then finally having it delivered. And now we're planning the June 6th show in Taos, a presentation at the Taos Community Auditorium, also known as the TCA. Happened? How did that get formed? And the book that is out right now is an inexpensive $125. That may sound like a lot, but it's really not much for a piece of art. And I think Taos Portraits, one, if you can find one, you have to pay $1,800 for it at the bookshops. So it's really rare.
It is very rare. We do still have some special edition of book one, just for your audience. So a lot does go into making a book of this size. It's not only an offset printing job, but it's also a very large book. This Taos Portraits 1 and 2 are both 12 inches by 15 inches. A lot of pages and a lot of fine paper. So what we did was we wanted, on book 2, we wanted to match as closely as possible book 1. As far as the size, we wanted it to look like a set. We found the same paper as close as we could get. We start with getting printing quotes from different companies and then deciding who will give us the best quality. And one thing about a book like this, too, you don't get a lot of large coffee table books by artists because they are very expensive to produce. And if we were to have paid for this production ourselves, we'd probably have to sell the books for like $250. We actually got most of our funding through donations. And we had the Taos Arts Council as our 401(k) or 3C. So people, when they did make a donation, they got a tax write-off. And it's such a community project that people were willing to put up the money to see it happen.
And where was it printed?
It was actually printed in China. We had a Korean broker, but because the book was so large, they couldn't do it on their presses in Korea. So we went to China to have it printed.
How did you find the printer in China? Did the broker help you do that? The broker knew where it was, or
Yep, the broker. Mm-hmm.
did you visit the area, or did you just trust the broker to make all that happen?
Well, Paul and I actually went for the press check. So we watched those pages come off of the press and checked the quality of the ink, made some adjustments if they needed to be made for the photos to be exactly how Paul wanted them.
Tell us a bit about when you went to China. What did it look like? What surprised you? What delighted you? Did you find it to be very different than what you imagined? Was it modern? Was it more of a old school press? Where was it? What did the town look like?
Yeah, the Shenzhen was the province that it was in, and it really did surprise me. It was an old school press shop. They had Heidelbergs, they had Japanese presses, they had a lot going on. And the town itself, I was so surprised it was so clean. Like, I was expecting China in an industrial area to be really smoggy and dirty. It was clean. The streets were clean. The air was clean. There were so many motorcycles that were electric. You couldn't even hear them coming. You had to make sure you were walking where you were supposed to walk so you didn't get run over by a moped. It was really interesting, and very good food. The hospitality of the people greeting us was wonderful.
What did the shop look like? How big was it? How many people were in it? Did they seem jolly? Or were they very serious about their work?
Yeah, well, they were serious about getting the quality. And I remember saying to Paul about this one young press guy, he's going to be a master. In press shops, it's sort of old fashioned in a way, or at least it was when I was in school, that you become an apprentice before you become a master. So you're learning by the people who have gone before you. And this one young guy was just so right on. And I just remember thinking, he's going to be a master. I would say that it was a pretty good atmosphere. You hear a lot of things about China and the work conditions. They all seemed happy to be there, and they took the job seriously.
And when you did your check and you said, okay, fine, this is good, we look forward to the book, how long did it take from the time you signed off on the book to the time it arrived in Taos?
Well, it took longer than we expected. When we left, the sheets were all printed, but they hadn't been bound yet. That was going to happen in one of their other facilities. So we came back to the US, and we were expecting the book to be here by the end of September. And I'm not really sure what happened on their end. And originally we had planned an event for October 18th, sent out the first email, had to backtrack and say, uh-oh, the books are not going to be here. And then, of course, Paul and Tizia live in Greece part of the time. He needed to get back there. So that's why we picked the June date. They can both be here. People are ready to celebrate having gone through the winter. And the books are here. So we've already started selling them at Michelle's Boutique downtown Taos, Jack Lutzig's Fine Art New Mexico in Arroyo Seco. The Harwood has some, and we have them online at taosportraits.com.
Tell us why you think the people belong in the book and what's going on with it. Give us some stories.
The thing about this book is that cross cultures are represented. Everybody in this book does something a little bit different than each other. And it shows the variety of art being made here and the personalities. And that's one thing I love about this book is that the stories are written by people who know them. It's not just one writer writing their resume. And so there's some really interesting little tidbits of information that you wouldn't know otherwise. One of my favorites is Lyle Wright, who's one of our Pueblo jewelers. He has Wright Creations on McCarthy Plaza, just off the main plaza. And I didn't know Lyle very well. He's pretty kind of soft-spoken, but once you get to know him, he's actually really funny. He sponsored a book fair the summer before this, actually. And I got to know him a little bit better then. He asked me to write his story. So I went and I spent like hours and hours talking to him at his gallery and getting all these stories. And the thing I loved about his portrait was he's wearing a shirt that's silk screened by Bernadette Track, who's in the book, and Robert Shorty. It's their son. They're both in the book. So AJ's shirt is what Lyle is wearing. And it has this image of a coyote with a headdress on. And then there's another animal that has a Indian blanket. And Paul took the photo at the Pueblo, and the light is coming through the latillas. It's hitting Lyle's face and the wall behind him, and it looks just like the sash and the feathers on the shirt. Very mystical. I really had to say yes when he asked me to write this story. He's a very complicated person, as we all are, I suppose. But he's got such a humorous side and yet a serious side. He takes his culture very seriously. He went through some tough times and came back around and is now helping children and other artists with his gallery. So that one I love. And another one, I actually got to go on 2 photo shoots with Paul. One of them was to Angie Yazzie, who is a a Pueblo woman and Navajo, and she's a master potter. She's won Indian market almost every year she's been in it. Awesome woman, very humble. It was really interesting to be with Paul and see how he just makes people feel really comfortable. Like I've known Angie for years, but Paul hasn't known her that long. He's known her, maybe a few years. And then the story, we're in her studio and there's pieces of pottery that she's working on. There's a bowl of mud on the floor. And then the story that Wiz Allred wrote just shows the depth that these people are willing to expose. Talking about going up into the mountains with Angie to get clay, and Angie's got her hand out the window. Wiz just thought, oh, she's just resting, their eyes closed. And then she says, stop here. What? Okay, as they stop, her grandmother told her to stop there and go and get the clay. She knew exactly where to go to get the clay that day because her grandmother told her. In her mind, in her heart.
Anita Rodriguez is in this book as well. I knew Anita years ago. She came to some of the events that I hosted in 2000, and she traded two prints for the tuition to the events, and I still have both of those. One of the things I do remember about Anita, and this is part of what Taos Portraits is all about in my mind, Anita used to host salons at her house. She would gather people together and have them come over for some food, but more for the conversation, stir things up a bit. And she'd love to just stir us up and get things going. And that was a long time ago when she was doing that. She may still be doing that. I don't know.
Oh, she is. She does still stir things up. I went to a reading of hers at Somos not too long ago. She's still teaching people about building with Adobe. And the thing I love about her story, which she wrote herself, is she brings in so much Taos history. She is a walking treasure. I'm so glad she's in the book. Yeah, what a beautiful woman.
Yeah, and then Michael Fitzgerald is in the book as well, and I've known Michael for 20 years. He's a film producer, and has a wealth of knowledge about not only films, but the way people interact creatively. And he's very resourceful with his creative thinking, especially when it comes to mentoring young people in the film business. And he's still very active. His sons are now in the film business as well. And so he brings that element to play into the Taos community. And I know that he's been responsible, because he's been in Taos for 20 years, responsible for bringing other people into the community that are in the film business as well. And still working, coming to Taos, and then going out, doing whatever they do. His photograph is in there as well.
Oh, I think that's another one that I love. None of these photos are the same. It's not like a studio shot. So Michael's is so close up that you see every hair on his face and his glasses and his eyes. It's just really a beautiful photo. And his partner, Kathy, wrote the story. And what I remember of it right now is talking about their house in Taos. The thing about Taos is it's not just a place. People really take it into their hearts, like it becomes part of them and they become part of it.
Michael and Kathy's house, it's a rather large place, and they also do gatherings. They will invite people to soirees or parties, call it whatever you want, come for dinner, whatever. Creativity and conversations happen at those parties. So there's a tremendous amount of cross-pollination that goes on at Michael's house. I remember it went on at Anita Rodriguez's house as well. So artists are doing that all the time in Taos, and I think that may be one of the reasons why it is such a magnetic place, because you can come and say whatever it is you have to say, and you can get somebody to listen to you.
Right, right. And you're not judged. Like there's so many interesting characters, and that's what people love about being here is the differences we all have.
And I would like to take the opportunity to expand the idea of not being judged. And what I would like to say is that when you do go to a party, or a salon or a gathering, there's a delightful kind of judgment that is going on that's counter to the don't judge me. You are judging the moment. You make a judgment on wanting to participate. I am making a judgment that I want to embrace the sensibilities of the Taos art community. So even though some judgments can be really snarky, and people do that, there's another kind of judgment, a discernment attached to the kind of judgment I'm talking about. And people bring an enthusiasm. It becomes quite sparky, this enthusiasm, when people get together, like we're doing right now. I'm glad to say that I'm one of the images in there. I'm really pleased to have my image in there with all these other people as well. Paul said when he took my image and he showed it to me, he said, Navé, oh, what a really beautiful face you have. Look at all those age spots and look at all those wrinkles. And here
Isn't
we
that
are.
great?
I mean, you're like, I'm saying, yeah, I see all those wrinkles. I see all those age spots. He said, well, you're in your 70s. You're supposed to have wrinkles and age spots. Look at the beauty of it. So the beauty you see in Taos Portraits is the beauty of uncertainty, the beauty of gradual sliding away. There's a line of poetry that I love to quote. All beauty begins with disappearance, the bitten edges of things, the gradual sliding away into tissue and memory, the uncertainty and dazzling impermanence of days we beg our meanings from, and their frayed loveliness. So Taos Portraits is all about frayed loveliness.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. People are not smiling like you would if somebody says, say cheese now. It goes also with the stories. You know, people are vulnerable with their friends. We kept their voices, which is really beautiful.
And so let's shift a little bit here and talk about this thing that's going to happen on June the 6th. And the reason I'd like to talk to you about it is because before we started our conversation, for everybody out there in the listening audience, you and I were talking about this show. I volunteered to help you put it together, to stage manage it, to direct it, to MC. My creative collaborator, Allegra Houston, who also wrote for the book, she wrote my piece actually. She's going to co MC it with us. And I was delighted to learn how open you are to creating an event that can include as many of these people as we possibly can. And
Absolutely.
and so I'd like for you to give some more thoughts on how you see this June the 6th event going. And I also want to tie the idea of what we're going to be doing on June the 6th to the old vibe of the Taos Poetry Circus. Because the
Isn't
Taos
that amazing?
it is the Taos Poetry Circus. Thank you, Annie McNaughton and Peter Rabbit. For those of you who are listening in Taos, you know the Taos Poetry Circus had a little bit more than a 20-year lifespan. It was it was a bit like a secret that's going on in Taos. You must go to the circus. You must go to the circus because all of these people are showing up. And sure enough, they did. And they had the Taos Heavyweight Poetry Bout on Saturday night. And at the height of the bout, 800 people or more, maybe even 1,000 showed up at the Sagebrush Inn to watch the poets fight it out on the stage. And it was just a raucous thing. Traditionally, it was always the first week of June. This event, Taos Portraits, is the first week of June on the 6th. And I think that's a Friday or a Saturday. Do you
It's
recall?
a Friday, Friday, June 6th, 2025.
We have an opportunity to create something on the stage as well as a full interactive experience for people who show up at the door of the TCA. So when people walk in, the show begins. When you come to this, like going to a big city, if you go to Paris or you go to New York and you go as a tourist, you can try to stay a tourist for a little while. But once you hit New York City, you are cast in the New York City play. Once you land in Paris and you go see the Eiffel Tower, then you are cast in the Parisian play and you become as much a part of the throb and bob and movement of Paris or New York as anybody else. So that's what we could do on the 6th of June. You walk through that door and you enter not just the room, but you enter the entire atmosphere of what the philosophy of the gatherings of all of the artists had throughout the last 1,000 years. Go back to the Pueblo and the artist in the Pueblo 1,000 years ago. And we can have that container at the TCA. Now, that's quite a vision. It may be more realistic in my imagination. And yet I get really excited when I think about how we can all put this together. So it becomes almost like a living book inside the TCA on the 6th of June.
Right. It's like an installation piece of art with all of the artists that can make it will be there, the writers, having a lot of them on stage reading. We have the big screen for the portraits to be shown. Paul will be there. I'll be there. Lynn will be there. The whole town will probably be there.
I hope so. Say more about the big screen on the stage. And one of the things for those of you listening in Asheville and other places around the world, or even in Taos, if you've not visited the TCA, if you haven't gone to see a movie there, you might just think, well, it's a little community theater and they have a kind of a dinky sound system and the screen's okay, probably a little dim and dull. 20 years ago, that might have been the case, but not now. They have a fully rigged system in there, thanks to the donations of many, many people. I think Michael and Kathy Fitzgerald were part of the momentum to put that together as well, among other folks. So a lot of people did that. Suddenly, you have a fully tricked out movie scene going on there. What's that screen going to look like up there on the stage?
Well, we have all 60 portraits running on a loop. So people could buy their book and go and sit in there, and then a little while later, the readings will start. And when the readings start, the stage will be people. We have those big velvet curtains, we have lighting, we have professional MCs with you, Navé, and Allegra. I think it's just going to be like the event of the summer, and it will kick off this summer, being the first weekend in June. And the TCA also has a big encore gallery before you even get into the theater. It's a huge space, so people will be drinking wine and eating snacks and going inside and outside. There's a little patio area there. It's a really amazing space to have an event like this.
When one says it will be the event of the summer, what makes an event memorable? All the participants make it memorable. If you show up, you are then part of the event of the summer. It's not something that you observe. And there's a good friend of mine, his name is David Lamont. And David talks a great deal, has even written a book about the hero narrative. And he is arguing that the hero story is all about one person doing one thing and everybody applauds that person. Yeah, you did it. Thank you for saving the village. Now I can go back to my regular life. I really appreciate it. David is arguing for the movement journey, the movement community. And so, what makes an event the event of the summer is the movement of all of the people gathering in one place and then interacting. I know I've been to Paris many times, and I often will go to Musée d'Orsay, which is one of the famous museums there. And you walk in, and it seems flat. You're like, well, what's the big deal? And then you get a little further in, and you see all these different rooms, and then you see the paintings and all the stuff that's going on, and folks walking around. Eventually, after a couple of hours, you work your way all the way to the very back, 5 floors up, and you look down to the entrance, which is way across what was once a train station, the flat entrance. And what you see are all these people moving about, and the people are the art. And you realize I am one of those. So that's what makes this Taos experience, coming to Taos for a short time or a long time, so rich, because it's all about movement, the artistic movement of Taos. And I mean movement in the sense of art is always moving, and sensibilities around creativity are always moving, and they will be on June 6th.
Yeah, there's always change happening, and in art, it's reflected. Artists are often the people that perceive it before anyone else.
Absolutely. So, pulling back from the large view of the Musée d'Orsay and the TCA, back to Kelly, the book designer. Tell us some things that you would like for us to know about you. And the reason I'm asking that is because you are very present in Taos Portraits. You have designed it. You have put it together. You went to China. You approved it. You're the one we have to thank for putting it together and holding it together mathematically, as you said. Tell us some things you would like for us to know about you and how you go about your creative work and why it's important for you.
Navé, I really enjoy working one on one with people. So if you're an author or a writer, want to be an author, I like to support that. So for me, I feel like I'm usually in the background and I'll have my name on the copyright page, but it doesn't matter. What matters is making you look good, having your words come out in the world, or your images being shown in the best way. I'm really comfortable being in the background like that. But one thing I have found is that people crave that one on one attention. And we often have our own creative blocks, whether we know it or not. If you've gotten as far to work with me as a designer, you've probably gotten through most of them. But I also see how people will maybe sabotage themselves a little bit and they'll have a professional editor go through their whole book and it's fully edited when it comes to me, but then they'll go and make changes like 10, 11 times. And sometimes I just want to say, oh, are you sure you want to change that? Let's look at what's really going on. So, right before COVID hit, I had come up with this idea to actually support people through one on one writer retreats and meeting them where they are, not helping them to actually write or edit them, but to help them get through it and appreciate the process because there's everything from writing the first draft that could be really messy to the craft of writing. And you can do that. And maybe sometimes you just need somebody to help you create that practice, create the time to sit down and write and the place you want to write, and to figure out, oh, am I better writing alone in the morning at home, or do I do better when I'm at a lively coffee shop? So it's like an experimental thing. They come to Taos for 3 days or 10 days, and we get them into a practice so that they can go step by step.
If I show up at your door, knock, 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 Kelly, you're going to open because you know you're expecting me. What do you do with me, the audience, the customer, the writer who shows up? I'm coming to Taos for 10 days. Knock, knock, knock. Now what? What would a 10-day period look like? What do you do with me?
So it really is individual. So even before you get here, we talk on the phone several times. And then it's going to be anything from getting you a place where you're going to stay that's either out in nature or downtown, depending on who you are. The food, you don't have to worry about going to the grocery store and cooking. You don't have to worry about taking care of the kids. It's like everything. And then also, one of my pastimes has been really studying the shamanic arts, the spiritual, soulful way of connecting with people. So I have little tools like that and focusing tools, meditations. Not everybody goes for that. So it could be anything from being really practical, sitting down and looking at your calendar and scoping it out, or it could be doing some energy work, taking a walk over to the gorge and sitting with nature until you really get clear on where you're going with your book.
So, looking at this 10-day spread, I like the idea of 10 days. It's long enough to breathe in. Somebody shows up, they're not quite sure what happens. What kind of transitions occur throughout that period? And have you noticed similarities even though everybody's different? I show up and you give me one direction and somebody else shows up and you give them another. Are there any through lines, any similarities between the people that you've noticed, or are they all just dramatically different?
No, I think the through line would be that if you've gotten to the point of coming to do this, you're serious, you want to make this happen. People in general are busy, and we tend to put our own self-care and our own creative care often to the back burners. So it's really bringing that up front and then creating such a foundation that when you go home, you continue. Because I'm not one of those people that think you can write a book in 10 days, but you can start a writing practice in 10 days.
Nice distinction. I'm curious about the food. You mentioned if I come to visit with you, I don't have to worry about my food. How in the world do you work that? How do you keep me from worrying about my food? Do you just plot me down at the espresso bar at the hotel down there on the South Side and say, Navé, order some muffins and see you in an hour or two?
And some people might not go for it, but what I picture for most people that works is we meet for breakfast if they're a breakfast person. I make them breakfast while they tell me how their day's going, or I bring something. And then there's like soups and really nourishing food. I'll find out what is your comfort food. And for you, it might be like mashed potatoes and baked salmon. If your comfort food is chocolate cake every night and ice cream, I probably will encourage you to maybe make some new habits that are going to be healthier, because one habit leads to another habit. If you're always taking a break to eat chocolate ice cream, maybe it's because you don't want to write down what's coming up next.
So you are doing a holistic approach to your collaborations with folks who come, and it's quite bespoke. So I'm going to show up and you're going to help me in a number of categories. And the idea is the more balanced I can be with my diet. Maybe you also encourage people to walk, exercise. I suspect you do that. At the end of the 10 days, I will have enough factors in place that will help me understand how to move forward in my writing discipline.
Absolutely. And some people might be near the end of the writing process. They need to just come and do their final polish. At that point, I can actually start the design for them, because then they see, oh my God, this can actually be held as a book. I can imagine it now because I'm holding the cover in my hands. If they're going to self-publish, I can help them to create their accounts to get it up online.
Wow. So you could start from scratch with me if I've never done anything at all and I just want to start. Oh, I have an idea for a book. I learned how to write when I learned the alphabet in the first grade, so I haven't forgotten English. I can write, but I need some help here. You can take me from that first impulse, that little seed of an idea, all the way through. I could come back more than once, right? I could come back four or
Absolutely.
five times. And finally, at the end, here you are, Kelly, saying, it's done. I've helped you arc through the whole thing, and you've self published and you're connected to all the things you need to connect to. And you have a little celebration and you push the button and off it goes. So you could do all of that for somebody.
I can help them do that. I don't do it for them. I'm just a facilitator of their own work.
So you provide the creative container for them to function in and to explore so that they can create the atmosphere and the momentum they need. And you're a bit like the director saying, sit at this table, try this because the sun is nice in this corner because I've been here before.
I might do that, right. Or I ask them the questions, they come up with their own answers. Like, be experimental. Let's see what really works best. You might think that sitting down for 2 hours at the computer in the afternoon works best because you've always done it that way, but let's try a few other things and see what really works, what sparks the imagination.
And so as we conclude, let me ask this question in conclusion. How long does it actually take, in your experience, from that first impulse to get a book finished so that it's delivered and on the shelf and ready to go?
I'm not even sure I can answer that. It's different for everyone. It might take years. I firmly believe when you get to the point that you think you've edited yourself very well, that you need to have a professional editor, which I am not a professional editor. I can read, but I'm not an editor. So then I might help them find an editor that they can work with. And then it comes to me for the design of the full book. Usually from the full design, by the time a manuscript comes to me, and the design is done, it might be 2 weeks before it goes to press. And then it depends on if it's going to be printed in an offset printing place. It might take, 4 months before the book is here. On-demand printing, usually a couple days. You get a test copy, and then you can start ordering author copies.
Realistically, you could probably write a book in a month and have it self-published if you put a hustle on it. It wouldn't be that well put together, but you could probably pull that out. But my experience has been it takes about 2 years or 2.5 years from the time you actually decide you're going to make it happen, staying with it for that arc of time and finally having something delivered.
Yeah.
It's about the time frame.
That's a pretty good time frame. I've heard of people taking like 13 years.
Well, yeah, Paul says for Taos Portraits, it took him 12. And it took
Right.
you and Lynn and Paul 2 years to put it together once you decided you're going to
Right.
do it. So there's a clear time frame right there. And people do have different styles. They do have different approaches. And the main thing I think that is required to make all of this happen is just commitment. If I'm going to do this, I have to show up and do it.
Absolutely. Commitment and allowing yourself to be authentic.
And then there's also the expense. People think, oh, I'll publish my book, or I can get somebody to publish my book for me. If I get somebody to publish my book for me, like Harper's or Norton, and the book is 250 pages long, they're going to invest at least a $75,000 in me just to get that book out with all the stuff that's required to make it be a professional book. So there's expense involved. So commitment is more than just showing up at the page. It's willing to say, I will invest my time, my money, and my energy in this project with no guarantee of success, except the sense of satisfaction that comes from the final product landing on the shelf.
And then if you're going with a traditional publisher too, that can add another couple years onto it.
Mhm. So for now, we're at the top of our time together, finished our hour, and I really appreciate you opening up, telling us about Taos Portraits, about book design. I got a kick out of talking about the Taos Portrait Circus. Thank you for letting me do that. And do you have any last words? How do people reach out to you if they wanted to come and work with you a bit? What do they do to make that happen?
Well, my website is winkvisualarts.com, and you can find Taos Portraits at taosportraits.com. And those are probably the best two. I also have yourbookdesigned.com. Goes to the same website, but it might be easier for people to remember Your Book Designed.
Your book design's fairly easy to remember because that's what I want. I need my book designed. Oh, you need your book designed? Yes, I do need my book designed. Well, go to yourbookdesign.com and that's where you'll find Kelly. So it's easier to remember. So Kelly, thanks for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with you as we move toward June the 6th.
Thank you so much, Navé. Have a good rest of the day.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Kelly Pasholk. And as we move forward over the next 12 months, I'd like to wish you a very productive 2025. And I'm looking forward to June the 6th, 2025, when Kelly and Paul O'Connor and Lynn Robinson, Allegra Houston, and I get together to produce this fabulous gala opening, we're calling it. I'm excited about all of that, which is happening in the beginning of the summer, 6 months from now. I'm recording this on January the 1st. It's around 11 a.m. in the morning. I am in the Philippines. I'm actually at a beach area, sitting at a picnic table, looking out on the sea. It's low tide. As always, the days are warm in the Philippines, no matter what time of year it is. This is the first time I have taken the opportunity to leave the cold climate and come to a warm climate. I've been here since the middle of October and plan to leave on the 9th of March, which will give me all of the winter here in the warm area of the Philippines. So I'm really grateful for that. It's calm and collected here under these large trees, a fair amount of sand, a boat over to the right that's not sitting in the water. It's an old sailboat. A few birds, some lights dangling from the trees. which means that whatever you're doing on New Year's Eve, it's 11 minutes after 10 o'clock Eastern Time, which means if you're in Asheville, you have 2 more hours until you welcome the new year in. And by the time you hear this, the new year will be underway. So for now, there's a bit of wind blowing off the sea, so I've covered my face with a hat in order to avoid the wind blowing across the microphone, which is really not a microphone. It's a Jabra call center headset with a microphone on it. If you're thinking about doing a podcast and recording it on your own, I recommend this because the microphone blocks the sound. I can record something in a coffee shop, and even though you might hear the background, you won't hear it to the point where it overwhelms what's being said in the recording. A couple of days ago, as we were driving into this location, we passed by a field of sugarcane. And in the field were 15 fellows harvesting the sugarcane. They had cut it already and had bundled it with strings. And they were running out into the field, picking up the bundles, bringing them back and tossing them on the truck. It was a very hot afternoon. The heat didn't seem to slow the fellows down. They hustled back and forth, loading that cane on the back of that truck. And I went back down there yesterday on a walk, and the field was empty. Nobody was working in it. Half the field still had the standing sugar cane. The other half, just the brown leaves left over from where the sugar cane was harvested. When we drove by, Tish said to me, "Look at those guys. That's where the sugar comes from. I'll bet there are people putting sugar in their coffee, putting sugar in their brownies, and they have no idea how hard people work in order to get that sugar to their table." And I agreed. I thought they probably don't. The heat alone is enough to wear you out. And yet these fellows probably were bothered by the heat, but they were so used to it that it didn't matter. They were working, putting that sugar cane up, and somewhere in the future, somebody will dish a bit of sugar out, put it into their coffee, stir it, taste the sweetness, have a conversation, go on their way, and never give a thought to where the sugar came from and how much work somebody had to put into harvesting the sugar cane in the first place so they could have a taste of sweetness in their coffee. So when you add some sugar to something in your life, keep those hardworking fellows in mind. And speaking of hard work, last night while we were celebrating the arrival of the new year, around midnight of course, I noticed a large black ant carrying something in its mouth, almost its same size. And nobody else noticed the ant. I just happened to spot it. It was running quite fast, came across the bricks, went down the little wall that holds the bricks together, and scooted out across the sand, bumped into a couple of leaves, went up and over a rock, and then disappeared under the rock. And it seemed to have no problems, exerting no effort, carrying something half its size or more. I thought, I'm a worker ant too. I carry things around, and I thought of my other friends, most of whom I've known for many, many years, and they're all worker ants as well. Sometimes we're carrying something half our weight, or sometimes maybe some of the things we carry feel heavier than our weight itself. And so as we move into 2025, whatever you're carrying, I hope you can manage it in a way that suits you. And as I move into 2025, I'm going to have a lot of other guests on the show. I keep moving with this show like the ant across the sand, and my enthusiasm is not diminished. I love interviewing people and finding out what they're all about. I learned a lot talking to Kelly about how to make a book, how to think about making a book, how to carry the weight of your story and put it out there in the world. And if you do happen to be in Taos in June, I hope you can make it to the June 6th opening of Taos Portraits II. I'm truly looking forward to working on that project and being there to see it unfold as the summer of 2025 begins. Who knows what any of this will bring? What I know for sure is this show brings us to the top of the hour, and I want to say thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVM-LP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Davine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for doing the same, managing KCEI Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. You can always reach me, Navé, at jamesnavé.com. I would love to hear from you. I'd like to remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go to get that started. And if you'd like to experience it, we have a free workshop that happens every Saturday at noon Eastern Time and every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can go to imaginativestorm.com for the Zoom link, and you can join us. It's always wide open, and we love to have newcomers, and we love for the newcomers to invite their friends. So perhaps we'll meet each other there. Who knows? So until then, I'd like to say thank you once again for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, for tuning in, and I do hope you come back sometime soon. And until then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.